For the next session, we have Henry Welham from Yagro, and he's going to talk to us about the benefits of data to farming businesses. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name's Henry Welham. I'm the Partnership Manager for Yagro, and Yagro are really to do with everything data. So strap yourselves in. If you didn't like data, I'm sure you're going to start liking data at the end of this presentation. So I'm sure you've all heard of the phrase, to manage is to measure. And really, what does that mean for farms? And how does data interact with that measurement and that management to drive strategy and decision making? Why is it time now to start earnestly focusing on business sustainability through the use of data? Well, as the saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The next best time is now. That said, there has been a huge amount of turbulence in the industry over the last couple of years. We've had quite significant price volatility right across the industry, from fuel, grain and commodities to fertiliser. And decisions on crop selection and rotation are also becoming more difficult and having a greater impact on financial security. At times, farming has felt more like gambling than it has food production. Couple this with the reduction and total loss of BPS by 2028, only exacerbates those concerns, causing some businesses to really question their solvency. In a recent DEFRA survey, a grower survey that they conducted, it came back that 68% of farm holdings indicated that they will need to make some change to their business in the next 3 to 5 years to stay viable. And 80% of those respondents said that the environmental impact will be highly important to the running of their business. So with that said, there are opportunities, and it's just been mentioned, but SFI has now been launched. It was slightly indecisive to start with, and there was a little bit of nervousness around which direction it would actually go. But it will provide growers with important additional revenue streams, helping to support that sort of financial and environmental sustainability. But it will take careful planning, a good strategy, and a strong understanding of the business. But that alone isn't going to future-proof businesses. So how can growers future-proof themselves? And often it requires a hard look at what businesses are doing and ensure that you're challenging yourself to enable that long-term sustainability and for businesses to thrive. So new technology may be a part of it, flashy new gadgets and new solutions, but often it's doing the simple stuff really, really well. And at Yagro, we believe that all starts with data. But data too has to have a really solid strategy in order to maximise its value. So what I want to cover today is a little bit of practical advice about how farms and consultants and stakeholders within farming businesses can look to integrate a farm data strategy to enable the greatest value from data possible. So the first part in the data strategy is the generation of data. In other words, do you collect it or not? Data is meaningless if it doesn't have relevance or purpose. So in order to capture relevant data and bring insights into farm, you must start with an aim. Now the aim is going to be different for every single farming business. It might be looking to reduce the risk from volatile markets. It might be looking to improve inventory management. It might be wanting to capitalise on the carbon markets, or actually just improve your cost flow, or simply just save the farm a bit of time. Data is nothing new to agriculture. Data is being recorded every day on farm and has been for multiple years, even if the farm doesn't quite realise it. an invoice coming into the farm, a sales and contract, the drill date and rate that you went on in a field when you were sowing. They're all really valuable pieces of data that are often being collected and then sit there siloed with little intrinsic value. The evolution of precision agriculture from the sort of early 1990s as well has really enhanced the amount of data collection happening on farm. The ability to collect site-specific sort of electronic data as a result of advancements in machinery and inputs has meant that field-level data and sub-field level data is now being regularly collected. But again, it's often not being put to really that much use. So while the generation of data need not be complicated, and often it's already sat there on farm, you should look to move that data collection to digital sources. And the reason for that is by using digital resources, you can start to make better use of that data. Let's just think about that. If I have all my invoices sat in a PDF, or they're all on a piece of paper, to start pulling those together in with my farm application records and my yield data, I wouldn't even know where to start. So the most important thing about generation of data is you're probably doing it already, and if you can digitalize it wherever you can, do. The next stage in the sort of data strategy is around collection. To start with, figure out what farm data you're already collecting. And as I've said, this might be stuff that you haven't quite thought of, but go through the areas of the farm, the production data and the agronomy data, drilling dates and rates, inputs applied, varieties, field rotations. Look at financial data, invoices and sales and contracts, machine data from fuel usage and yields. Then think about what data you should be collecting. And by this I mean, what is my farm and the direction of my farming business going in the future? And how do I need to report? And how do I need to prove what I'm doing? It might be something as simple as having a combine that has the ability to record yields, but you just haven't set it up because it takes too much time and you don't see the intrinsic value on just the yield maps alone. But the messaging is all data is valuable, so make sure you know why you're collecting it and what you're able to collect. And then the last point in terms of collection is what data could you be collecting? Now this isn't necessarily something that you should be doing immediately, but there is a lot of change in the industry and there is a lot of requirement to report and have verified data proving what you're doing. So if it's something like analysing muck and getting the data out of that, then maybe you should start thinking about that. Maybe it's fuel usage to be able to report better into the carbon markets. And start small and think ahead. So you don't have to solve everything here and now, but as long as you start the data strategy and moving in that right direction, you won't look back in 5 years and regret. The next piece is management. And arguably this is the most important part within a data strategy. When implementing a data strategy, make sure it's straightforward and understood amongst the whole team, and most importantly, consistent. Now, I had a recent engagement with a grower where I saw exactly this data inconsistency firsthand. And it was basically due to a lack of naming conventions on farm. There was no expectation to sort of set naming conventions for each of the different fields. So when the workers were going in on different applications, spraying, fertiliser spreading, whatever it may be, they would go into the field and enter what they thought the field name was. They might have slightly spelt it differently or put a 1 after it. They thought they were doing the right thing, but in fact, when you looked on the back end of that data coming in, there were 7 or 8 fields that were actually all the same one. So already, just from trying to do the right thing, but not setting expectations and not having that consistency, you can start having challenges in the data before you've even gotten to the point of processing it or analysing it or even making use of it. Again, this is where digital systems come in. Don't expect to do it all yourself. If you go through and set that sort of expectation, why not try and get as much of it done automatically, the data exchange, the aggregation and pulling together of data, and the analysis. Don't be a busy fool trying to figure it out all yourself. Look for support and look for digital systems that are available in the market. The next thing is training. In the same way that you would train on farm safety, or train on how to use a sprayer, or sort of servicing machinery, data training should be a part of the messaging going on farm. And again, that's around keeping the consistency, but also having a bit of responsibility for data on farm. It shouldn't just be a farm manager or a farm owner. Everyone in the business should know why you're collecting data and what the resulting value of good quality data is. And finally, in terms of management, calibrate, calibrate, calibrate. If you have rubbish in, you'll have rubbish out. If you can't trust the data, then there is no point in doing this exercise whatsoever. So make sure the machinery is calibrated. Make sure, in the same way that you would calibrate a moisture meter, that the combine yield monitors are calibrated, that the drill's calibrated. And actually sometimes look to calibrate yourself as well. Go in and audit the data process. Go in and check things are being done the right way, because it will be a lot easier doing it sort of a little and often approach, rather than getting to a stage where you need business insight from your data and you realise everything you've collected over the last 4 or 5 years is a complete mess. So another important element, and it sort of fits in with the management, is the storage of data. Make your data value by storing it in a location where it can be used to generate information and insight. It's no good just having loads of scrap pieces of paper, farm diaries, drill books sat around if you can't then pull them into other digital data sources and start making the most of it. So if you have got a mix of digital data and physical data, maybe one of the first tasks should be to actually transfer that hard copy paper data over to a digital form so you can start making use of it. Consider using sort of digital recording software in this as well, so it's all in one place and you can't use it. And make the most of cloud-based systems. Instead of having to have it on a computer and a USB, why not just collect data, it go up into the cloud, it can be transferred from machinery to laptops or computers, all without you having to even think about it. So there are these systems that are available. Look to utilise them and gain from them where you can in terms of data collection. And arguably one of the most important bits is the security, ownership and access of data. Data in agriculture has got somewhat of a sort of a it's a bit of a dirty word in agriculture. People are nervous around data and how it's going to be used. So ensure the systems that you are using are firstly secure. And cloud-based systems are brilliant for that. But also be aware of who has access and make sure that you actually own the data that you've produced. Now that might seem obvious, but there have been some quite scary things in the industry happen where basically certain software companies have said, well, we're now going to sell the data. You think, well, that's my data. How is that going to be used against me? So make sure that you're confident on how your data is being used. And one of the elements that might help you with this is the British Farm Data Council. So I'd encourage you to have a look at this. This is a new initiative that's been set up. And the collaboration around data in agriculture is going to be vital going forward to ensure long-term survival of a lot of businesses and to be constantly improving. But with that comes a little bit of mistrust and not knowing where your data is being used. So the British Farm Data Council are really there just to promote the gold standard of data governance for UK agriculture and to grow confidence when it comes to farm data. Now, up until this point, a farm could go and do all of this activity and that data could sit there. Absolutely fine. At least they've started in the right direction and they can see that vision for the future, that data might at some point become integral to their business. However, the next point to start actually making use of that data is the processing. Now, this quote here, I think, is really nice. It's from one of our customers who said, "We know we want to measure and analyse more than most, but the toughest part about it is processing that data so we can draw conclusions from it before it's out of date." Now, interestingly, that's probably rather unique to the agricultural industry. We are very cyclical. The decision from one decision to the next is sometimes only a couple of weeks. And if you've gone to all that trouble of collecting data and then you can't actually put it to use in a timely manner and when you need it, then arguably what's the point of collecting it at all? Now this is difficult. I'm not saying this is easy, but you should be aware that at some point your data is needed to be processed to be able to make sense of it. And a big part of that, as I've mentioned before, is the accuracy of that data. If it's not accurate and you don't trust it, then the processing side of it is rather meaningless. Look for companies or support that can validate the data, not only in the knowledge that the insight that you're getting back from it is correct, but also the validation of data is going to be really important when you need to start reporting for various aspects in the industry. It might be private funding that actually they need to see what's happened on farm and they need some validation from that data. Now there are systems and ways of doing this, benchmarking, looking at anomalies, cleaning data and looking for gaps to ensure there are complete data sets, but the validation and accuracy of data is really important. The next part in processing is data aggregation. In other words, pulling all of those different data sources into one space where you can actually get some actual decision making off the back of it. Having yield data is nice to see. Oh, that field did 9 tonne a hectare, that field did 8 tonne a hectare. But it's rather meaningless if you don't have all the costs of the applications, all the application information, the quality specs that have gone out of it, the fuel that's being used to apply it, the gross margin and net margin. And it's surprising how many farms don't actually have that detail or understand that detail at a field level. So you need a way of pulling all that information together. And it has to be easy. Again, it's time sensitive. You need the information to make decisions from. Sometimes you might need to ask for a little bit of help with this. Now comes the fun bit. You've got all your data, you've organised it, you've structured it, you've stored it, you've validated it, you've aggregated it all together. Now comes the bit where you can actually start to analyse it and make decisions from it. So farms wanting to develop and implement a successful farm data strategy should consider the combination of hardware, software, and human capital resources that best fit their farm. So investments in farm software may be things like yield mapping, soil analysis. It might even be our own platform. But also you should look for investments in human capital, either as on-farm employees with designated data responsibilities or in trusted off-farm data services that can greatly improve the value of the recorded data. The other part is to work closely with advisors. I'm sure there's a great relationships with advisors and growers in this room already, but actually it's that relationship around data now that is a new space in agriculture. It's not necessarily just about regen and direct drilling and cover cropping. Actually, what's the insight we can start getting from this data and what's the actual decision making we can make as a strategic partnership on this? So work closely with advisors when it comes to data. And then once you've got the data analysed, figure out, go back to those farm objectives and aims, and kind of give yourself a hard look in the mirror and say, where are my knowledge gaps? Where are the pitfalls in this business? And to do that in a safe space, using your own data that you trust, is extremely empowering. And sometimes you need that sort of a cold shock therapy to be able to then know you want to action decision making. And start with a focus. So I just want to give a bit of a case study here on one of our growers. Apologies, the writing is a little bit smaller, but this is really around how he's done all of those steps to implement this successful data strategy. He's a large farmer down in Kent, around 1,400 hectares, extremely productive, with wheat yields averaging around 11.5 to 12 tonnes a hectare. Now, a lot of people go, oh, that's brilliant, I'm doing a great job, but he wanted to know actually where were his pitfalls and could he push his productivity even further. So him, along with a number of other growers in this area who are on our platform, got together and they discussed what they thought their limiting factors were. Now, this grower knew he had to delay his drilling, he had a grass weed problem, but he also saw that his drilling window was significantly larger than the rest of his peers. It was a 6-week drilling window. And when he had all the data analysed, he realised that there was a significant cost of production increase from his later drilled wheat, and a massive variability in that as well. So he was treating it all the same, but seeing massive differences in terms of his later drilled wheats, in terms of yield potential, cost of production and gross margin. So what the analysis showed is if he was able to tighten his window to that 2.5, 3-week drilling window where he was getting the most consistent and best performing yields, he would make some quite considerable money from that. So the decision was to basically go out and buy a second-hand drill. And that decision was made in a meeting that lasted 2 hours, using analysed, structured, organised information to be able to lead to that decision making. And so he's now dropped his drilling window from 6 weeks to 2.5 weeks, and the return on investment from additional gross margin from that is expected to pay for that drill in 1 year. Now, the grower had an expectation that the drilling date was a limiting factor, but until he had seen that data reported back to him, he wasn't comfortable enough to make that decision. It was a gut feel. It was just a thought. So this is a great example of how an implemented solution based on data insights has provided really good returns from the farm. And then finally, the last one is visualization. And this comes really hand in hand with analytics. Now there's a spreadsheet there, but that's just a few lines of data from 1 year looking at some inputs onto a field. It's very difficult to read through, it's very difficult to make anything of it, regardless of how accurate and how clean and how well structured that information is. So making sense of raw data is hard and really time consuming. So look for software that helps visualize multiple data sources, that aggregated data, and how to actually visualize it and make sense of it. It requires well-designed graphics and maps to help understand that underlying data, and it has to be easy to digest and show the bigger picture. And this is exactly what visualized data looks like. Now, it might seem confusing to start with, but there's 6 years of data there across, I think, 27 fields, all the cropping on those fields, showing cost of production and yield. And what it's basically showing is that red line across the middle is the normalised cost of production and normalised yield. So in other words, anything to the right and above that red line is consistently performing better than anything on the left that is under the line. Those fields on the far left-hand side, and I'll just check that is right, are performing 50%, on average 50% poorer than the average field on the farm. You've also got all the field sizes on that graph as well. So you've now got your whole picture of your farm, all the cropping, the full rotation, the cost of production, the yield, and the field size on one map. So from there I'd go, well, we've got some small field sizes on the left-hand side that are consistently underperforming and costing me 30–40% higher than the average field. This is where I'm going to start capitalising from SFI and those additional revenue streams, and actually ensuring my business is profitable, rather than just having the same approach across my whole farm because it's easy. This is what data enables. And the last thing to talk about is interpretation. You've gone to all of that trouble to analyse it, have a look through it, and visualise it. Don't forget to act on it. Don't forget to act on that visualised data, because it's only then when you implement change and review that you know your data strategy is successful. Work with the stakeholders. Understand the business in new detail and don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Identify variables that could be limiting or driving productivity. Have the tools and info to exploit potential new business opportunities, and ultimately build a stronger, more sustainable business. So perhaps the phrase shouldn't be to measure is to manage, but rather to manage is to measure. Thank you.